Demon's Souls, what enlightened Souls fans will call the original Souls game, is a bit strange. Yeah, of course, now 13 years later, we all know how important and influential these games would become, but let's just say the series didn't really kick off with a bang. It was more like a spark that grew into a small but strong flame, a flame that, come the next game in the series, would become the all-consuming wildfire it is nowadays. This tale starts in 2009. You see, From Software were the kings of making bizarre, niche games that definitely weren't built for commercial success. And that's not a diss, mind you. I personally love any weird experimental stuff, doesn't matter what it is, but I'd be lying if I said these games are widely appealing. I think the easiest way to sum up their old energy would be by hearing a few tracks from said games.
No problem.
Yeah, really strange, right? But truth be told, I think these are all absolute bangers, and these songs are pretty much solely responsible for me going back and playing their old library. Well, that and YouTube videos. Back then, From Software would release a lot of random strange things. Usually they were RPGs, but sometimes they would be horror, and sometimes they would be whatever this is. Though it wasn't all random new IPs, they did actually have two main franchises, those being Armored Core and Kingsfield. Armored Core is a mech game. This video is not about a mech game. Kingsfield, on the other hand, does have a lot to do with what we are discussing. This game is the first game FromSoft would ever publish, and it had brought them moderate success. Because of that, they would pretty much stick with the series forever, technically. They would make many sequels, spin-offs, and spiritual successors to that game, and usually these games would come out in bursts with 3 or 4 years in between each other. This matters because now it's 2009 and the time had come for a new entry in the series, though this time they were planning on making a spiritual successor that was going to be co-produced by Sony. Now, the development for this Kingsfield spiritual successor, co-produced by Sony, was going nowhere. The development was pretty rough starting out, mainly because no one had a clear vision of what exactly they wanted to do. So the game went through development hell for a long time. Until a developer by the name of Miyazaki would decide he would direct the project. The reason? Pretty simple. People had started losing hope in this project, and the ones that were still working on it had been told a very vague goal of making action RPG, like the old school one. You know? Meaning if he did pick up the position, he could do pretty much whatever he wants with it, and since everybody involved in the project doesn't really see it succeeding, his creation could bomb horribly, and nobody would fault the guy. Now luckily, Miyazaki had been wanting to make a game like this for a while, so after picking it up, it very quickly started forming up into Demon's Souls. For a little history on Miyazaki, he was a man that, despite only recently joining the company as a coder for the Armored Core games, had gotten a bit of reputation for being a really hardworking dude who was full of ideas. Up to this point, Miyazaki had already worked on many company projects, and in almost all of them, he would always bring up ideas with his coworkers and directors to improve the games, all while being completely willing to take on whatever extra workload came from these ideas. So yeah, the dude wasn't just hardworking, he was passionate. Because of this, he had gotten a good reputation, one that would allow him to become a director for Armored Core 4 and Armored Core Answer Day, which, after how well he handled those games, showed the higher-ups that they could trust him on taking care of Demon's Souls. A decision they would not regret. At least they wouldn't regret it 2 years from then. You see, while development would go smoothly and he was able to really make what he wanted, turns out what he wanted wasn't what many others wanted. The foreseen problem was that the game's base was formed from Kingsfield, which is shown in the game's dark atmosphere and high difficulty. Mind you, industry trends during that time were saying make games less demanding, more cinematic, and more accessible. Which is the exact opposite of Demon's Souls. Remember that weird quote I said earlier? Well, the actual quote was wanting to revive a lost breed of action game, which was actually proposed by Sony's Takeshi Kaiji, one of the game's 2 co-producers. This idea was one that the other co-producer, FromSoft's Masanori Takeuchi, was all for, and an idea that Miyazaki, the new director, was a little too for. Fun fact, the game had a permadeath mechanic at some point. Even funner fact, that was one of the very little proposals that the dev team had told Miyazaki was taking it a bit too far. Luckily, From Software were no strangers to making these types of games, so they really had no problem with anything Miyazaki came up with. Sony, however, might not be so receptive to these ideas. Luckily, Kaiji, being the based man he was, made sure to never disclose too much information to Sony about what they were actually making, due to knowing his company would most definitely begin asking for changes, which would most definitely ruin the game they wanted to make. That game being, as Miyazaki would put it, a challenging, gameplay-based game. The type of game that would not be received well by most people. The type of game you can't demo, which is why it was no surprise when it was demoed at a games conventions, everybody thought the game was terrible or just straight out unfinished. Probably the hardest hitting quote I read from that conference being Sony's own president Shuhei Yoshida saying, "This game is unbelievably bad." Yikes. So come release time, despite the game being a critical success, it wasn't really a commercial one, to the surprise of nobody. I mean, have you ever tried convincing someone to put their hand on a hot stove? I really hope you said no to that. Because of the middling sales, the game was dismissed by Sony, and they decided there wasn't really any point in publishing in the West, despite there already existing an English translation that had been made for Asian markets. Which is where Atlus comes in. A publisher well known for bringing over games from Japan, and a developer well known for making hardcore, challenge-oriented RPGs. The publishing deal was broken on meh terms. Everybody knew first-party publishing was out the window, so this was the best they could do. Atlus was also well aware the game probably wouldn't sell well and were prepared for mediocre sales. In fact, apparently the only reason they did want to publish it was because of the game's high quality, i.e., they thought the game was cool. Later into the year, America would see its own version of Demon's Souls released, published by Atlus, which would again receive critical acclaim, but this time was also a commercial success, blowing Atlus's assumed 75k copies sold by the end of the year out of the water. The game had also finally started getting some traction in Japan through good word of mouth alone, resulting in 2011, 2 years after release, the game had successfully sold 1 million copies worldwide. A major success from what seemed at first to be a cataclysmic failure. Well, now with the history lesson out of the way, I think it's high time we check out what Miyazaki had called a challenging, gameplay-based game. I mean, yeah, it's a Souls game. That's a strange thing to me. People describe games as Souls-like or having Souls mechanics, but being the first game in the series, it technically all started here. So all these things that seem completely normal to me now were actually pretty innovative at the time. Now, while some would point out similarities to other games before it, like say Monster Hunter, as it turns out the game's mechanics sorta came about without any real inspirations. Those similarities are there, Miyazaki doesn't deny it, but those games weren't in their minds when making this one per se. After all, most of this game's DNA comes from Kingsfield. Speaking of, let's take a really quick look at that game. Let's stop taking a quick look at that game. Jokes aside, I will say the game is good. I said jokes aside, I'm being serious. Look, I won't imaginarily stand here and say this gameplay is great, but something I noticed while playing is that I don't think that matters all that much. The game's atmosphere is pretty funky, and it has NPCs that look like this in it. I think the NPCs look cool. I also think this shopping theme goes hard. Also, the troll design is here in full force. You can really make terrible mistakes in this game, and the developers will not stop you from doing so. It's a strange game, it really is, but something about it just sorta clicked with me after a while. This game has stats, equipments, items, consumables, all the usual RPG stuff, but it also has a stamina bar, though the way it works here, it feels more like an action bar since it's pretty much just used as a cooldown timer for your attacks. Either way, it does give the combat an interesting feel. Not a good one per se, but it's interesting. Let's just say the combat feels clunky, and I really wish I could follow up that sentence by saying, for lack of a better word. But no, it's a pretty apt description. If it wasn't for this control scheme I had mapped to my keyboard, I don't think I would have enjoyed this game at all. A lot of it is pretty much walk in, smack, walk out, or circle straight for armed enemies and smack them on the back. Surprisingly, this is all you ever really have to do to avoid enemy attacks, which says a lot because the player character controls like a T-95. Controlling like a prototype 100-ton super heavy glass tank destroyer designed to pierce through Germany's Siegfried Line during World War II before ultimately getting terminated without seeing any use means that you are gonna spend a lot of time taking what feels like unavoidable damage. You just simply don't have the mobility to dodge some of the damage that comes your way. So many battles involve a lot of drain tanking and brute forcing. Though, thanks to being old, this game is very cheesable, which for games like these I see as a good thing. The whole time the difficulty will just beat on you constantly, so whenever you turn the tables around and suddenly start bullying the game for a bit, it feels really good. But you know what's even more brutal than this combat? Mentally speaking. The world. Kingsfield feels very uninviting, sort of like it doesn't want you around. If you don't pay attention, the game will just start tossing you around like a ragdoll, and even if you do, that might just happen anyways. The NPCs in this place are pretty much all weirdos, though I do think it's interesting that one of the first ones you meet is a crestfallen warrior. Funny how they kept this trope around from the very beginning. Honestly, it really does get the mood going though. Which is what this game actually has going for it. Despite looking like this, I actually found myself sort of getting sucked into the experience. When I first started out, it was pretty spooky and running around the dungeon always felt a little nerve-wracking when I didn't know what was around the corner. Not to mention, these straight up baffling NPCs really did make me feel like I was alone out here. Now yes, that mood can get ruined a bit by the fact that, well, I mean just... Look, I know people might be watching this while eating. Let me fix that real quick. Yet even though I couldn't play this game for longer than 3 hours without getting a major migraine, I really did enjoy my time with it. In fact, the more I played Kingsfield, the more I wanted to make a video on all the Kingsfield as an excuse to play them, which I take as a good sign. Yeah, the story doesn't really matter. I think I'm in a grave or something looking for relics. Honestly, I think that was just an excuse to make everything look like a cave, but it's thanks to that ever gloomy, moody, broody atmosphere I actually got pretty into it. And the combat, while a bit stiff, does have its high points. For one, I really like the feeling of running around an early area and one-shotting all the mobs that gave me trouble. Hell, you know what? I'll go as far as to say that I thought Kingsfield was a good game. Now, whether I'd say this game is worth your time. No, I always remember Miyazaki at an award conference putting a really big emphasis on how much the development team behind the Souls games had a lot to do with how they came out, and after playing something like Kingsfield, it's more than obvious that that really is the case. Now, I'm sure many of the devs come and go and get swapped around a lot in the company, and I have no clue what the inner goings on are over there, but it's pretty obvious that this commitment to making a game like this has always been there, with or without Miyazaki. Yes, he is the guiding hand that would eventually bring the style of game into the mainstream, but damn, do the folks at FromSoft know how to make a mean, dark fantasy RPG with challenging gameplay. Which is why I've decided to focus on using the Moonlight Greatsword for all these playthroughs of the games, as a callback and reminder to where it all really began.
How the fuck did I get here? Oh, I see. No, I don't see.
Though I guess it is a bit strange to say that without even talking about the game first.
What?
Demon's Souls is a game where you play as a hero tasked with putting the Old One back to slumber. The Old One being this force that God had created in this world in order to punish people for using the soul arts. When the Old One is awakened, with it comes a colorless fog that is accompanied by a scourge of demons. Demons with the ability to consume the souls of many and grow more and more powerful, sitting at the top of their hierarchy, the Archdemons, who are tasked with bringing souls to the Old One. Now, the only way to get the Old One to stop and fix this whole mess is with the help of the Wax Maiden that can only get his attention if you go and kill all the Archdemons. And so, your quest begins. Now, I am skimming over a lot, and I mean a lot. But for the time being, this is everything you need to know about the setting. And so comes the gameplay, the delicious, succulent gameplay. It's astounding that 13 years later, people are still struggling to replicate the Souls gameplay feel. The feel that started with this game. At the core of the Souls system lie a couple of extremely important fundamentals: resource management, risk versus reward, and awareness. The resources you are to manage as the player, excluding things in your inventory, are right here on the top left corner of the screen. HP is HP. If you don't know what HP is, then how did you find this video? MP is only used for casting spells, so it's not really important if you don't use any. Unlike stamina, which is the one that you have the most control over and the most complex of the three. You see, in these games, every action you take uses up stamina, except for using consumables, meaning all offensive and defensive actions are attached to this semi-limited resource. Attacks, blocks, rolls, parries, running, casting, it all uses up stamina. Because of this, you need to constantly be aware of this bar when doing anything risky, or else you'll be vulnerable for a small amount of time, which, in a game where enemies have a tendency to maul you, feels like a pretty long time. Though sometimes you might get forced into using the whole thing because the immediate reward outweighs the foreseeable risks. Yeah, the stamina bar is a pretty big risk and reward indicator. You can keep swinging, which will reward you immediately, at the risk of getting smacked after you finish, but even all your actions have the same thought put behind them. Your attacks have startup and end lag, your spells have cast time and distance, blocking attack stuns you for a time, rolling leaves you completely open after using, parries will only deflect a small bit of damage and chunk your stamina if you fail them. Every action you make has both up and downsides, and usually the more severe the downside, the more rewarding the upside. Blocking an attack might guarantee you take no damage, but it doesn't put you in a good position typically, and depending on the attack, it can cost a lot of stamina. Whereas rolling will always cost a small amount and give you a brief window of vulnerability, hopefully putting you in a better position, but the risk is, well. And parries, for how hard they are, give you the good hits. Yeah, boy. Risk reward is even sewn into your equipment. Big heavy weapons deal a lot of damage but are extremely slow, not just when swinging but after as well. I notice whenever me or anybody I've seen use these things misses a swing with them, they get hit with the oh shit phenomena. Risk reward is also factored into your defensive equipment as well. Armors have weights, the better ones usually having higher weights. Which matters because in this game you have an equip burden, and once it passes certain thresholds, your character begins to both move and roll slower. Because of this, some decide to forego it altogether in order to have more mobility. Except now you have this obvious problem of, oh my god, why does everything keep one-shotting me? Although you probably could have avoided that one-shot if you saw it coming, or were maybe just paying more attention. That's right, you can manage your resources into oblivion, factor in all the risks, but if something blindsides you or you don't take notes of your environment, odds are you will still get manhandled by these places. The thing is, most enemies are following the same rules as you, and not just the human types, but all types. They follow patterns, some easier than others, but no matter how complex, they all have weaknesses. Weaknesses that you can exploit if you are paying attention. Problem is, pattern recognition stuff like that tends to get pretty old if you don't spice it up. Which is why luckily nothing is ever in your favor in this world. The areas you have to go through tend to be just as deadly as the enemies themselves, from rickety scaffolding to tight spaces where you can't swing your weapon. Rarely do you ever feel completely unhindered when going through the areas. Mainly because the areas themselves are an enemy. There are traps and enemies in strange places all over the place. If something looks free, odds are it is, but sometimes it isn't, and this is why I have trust issues from FromSoft. Thankfully, due to how traumatizing these traps can be, you aren't going to be forgetting about them anytime soon. The great thing about being immortal is that even when you die, you still gain something. Sometimes knowledge, sometimes an insatiable rage. Though the strange thing to me is that although the game is completely unfair, I never feel the unfairness in a bad way, and I think that has to do with how dead honest the game is. You will die over and over, but it's never treated with any grandioseness you would expect from other games. Your life count doesn't go down, you don't have to reload any save, no cutscene plays out, you just respawn like nothing happened. The only real punishment being that now you have to get back to where you died in order to reclaim your money, which only stings just enough to give you a reason to care about not dying again. Yes, you get beat up, mangled, ransacked, shivved, tossed, toasted, exploded, bullshitted, obliterated, but the game always tells you to just get up and try again. It will never make anything easier or harder. All it asks is that you get accustomed to what it's throwing at you. The only thing the game ever asks from you is improvement. All it asks is that you get good or at least die trying. And that right there is the most important part of these games. The difficulty isn't the point, it's the way the player interacts with it, the way the player might adapt to it, the way the player will feel once they've overcome it. The real core at the center of all Souls games is adversity and honesty, which is something that was severely lacking in games at the time. Demon's Souls really is just a challenging gameplay-based game. Something more, but nothing less. And yeah, I did mean to say something, because there is one thing in here that does rival its own gameplay. And that's its atmosphere. The areas in this game are dreadful. I hate almost all of them. I don't feel excited revisiting any of them, and I think that's a good thing. Boletaria is the only area in the game that feels like a breakpoint from all the others, and that's sorta cause it is. The only way to beat the game is to go through Boletaria, but as you progress through Boletaria, you will hit roadblocks that require you to go to the other areas. Which means that yes, you do have to finish every single area in this game. And before going more in depth, here's my quick thoughts on each of them. Stonefang is fine. Fuck this one too, also this one. In Stonefang, it's just dudes that resist physical attacks, but they aren't even that deadly, so you don't necessarily have to deal with them. That is, unless they have the bag. Make sure you secure the bag. Stonefang is also the shortest area out of all of them. You can run through the whole place in almost no time at all. Though, since it is the second area you're supposed to go to, it does make sense. Moving on, the Tower of Latria starts off with a headache-inducing maze, followed by the Funhouse of Flesh. After that, you got Shrine of Storms, which isn't that bad once you get the hang of it, honestly. And then it's the Valley of Defilement, which proves to me that nobody had actually played Demon's Souls when Dark Souls blew up, cause the Swamp of Sorrows makes Blighttown look like a place I'd be willing to live in. All the areas in this game feel run down, dangerous, and unwelcoming, in the best way possible. In fact, I'll go as far as to say that if I didn't have to trudge knees deep through mystery juice for 15 minutes, I might have to call this game bad. I feel like this pained gameplay style almost demands an equally pained world. If the characters in this game weren't also struggling, if the world in this game didn't also feel like it was yearning to get it over with already, then my own experiences would have felt misplaced. Imagine trying to fend off some corny looking gargoyles on top of a bridge overlooking some generic ass medieval town, and your character says some cheesy one-line when he beats him. In this scenario, my thoughts would be, damn, this sword feels clunky. Now, instead of that scenario, imagine fending off attacks from a gargoyle with beady red eyes on a thin bridge hovering over a bottomless darkness. The only beacons of light in this place being strange monolithic skyscrapers and the pale moonlight. Imagine if, during the battle, all you felt was a light vibration coming from your controller, similar to that of a heartbeat. Imagine if, after besting the gargoyle, you are only met with silence and low ambience. That heartbeat still going on in the distance all the same. Now, in this scenario, my thoughts would be, damn, What happened here? There's this alluring beauty to the desolation in Demon Souls. In Tower of Latria 1, all you hear is low thundering and a prisoner singing off in the distance. Occasionally, this ambience will be broken up by the jailer's bells, ear-piercing and frightening due to how dangerous those guys can be. Visually speaking, this place is gorgeous. The pale mist trailing over the prison floor, the light flashes from distant thunder, the slight glow given off by torches and candles. Seriously, makes me go, damn, what happened here? And if you think this place sounds oppressive, you don't know anything about the Valley of Defilement. I think the best way to sum up that place is by the level names. Starting off, we got Depraved Chasm, right? Followed up by Swamp of Sorrow, And for the last one, I'll just show you what's there. Yeah, that makes 2 times I've made this video food unfriendly. Though, while I will say the game's mood is mostly just somber and oppressive, it does occasionally get broken up by the Souls series' most iconic feature, the boss fights. When going through the areas, it feels like you're surviving, yes, but in the enduring type of way. It's pretty slow and methodical. Now, in the boss fights, your heart rate skyrockets and suddenly there is no time to relax until either you or that vile creature is dead. The music swells, the blows are deadly, and the enemy is imposing, but it's a shame that a lot of these bosses are more puzzles than any test of skill. I'd say only 3 to 4 bosses go into that territory, and one of them is the final boss. The rest, well, definitely still extremely cool, like any real challenge once you figure them out. And not in the gotten used to their pattern type of way, more like they legit cannot fight back type of way. Honestly, difficulty-wise, none of the bosses in this game are difficult, which is probably why when the final boss does come in and you suddenly have to actually fight an honest battle, a lot of people start dying despite how simple the fight actually is. The biggest offenders of this are probably all the bosses in the Shrine of Storms. The first one, Abjudicator, is baby easy mode, just smack him on his weak spot, and whenever he's gonna swing, just walk to one of his backsides. Even when you can't get behind him, he swings so slowly you can actually just walk around to the other side before he hits you. The second one, Old Hero, is a blind man. He cannot see you as long as you don't roll, run, or hit him twice in a row at a range. Meaning, as long as you equip the Thief's Ring, this is what the whole fight will look like. And last, but definitely not least, the Storm King. This fight is so cool the first time you do it that I'm okay with it just being a piss easy baby fight again. The idea is you pick up the Storm Ruler, which is located on the cliffside, then run over to this house and equip it. After that, you just start firing away. And you could actually just fight the boss in this safe zone without ever being in any danger. Yet, despite explaining how all these bosses are complete jokes and pushovers, they never feel that way once you're actually fighting them. When the Abjudicator swings his massive blade, I tense up a little. Whenever the Old Hero spontaneously starts running towards me, even though I know he can't actually see me, my soul still decides its time has come. And Storm King? This boss's energy feels so good, I start saying corny lines when I'm fighting him. It'd be a really big shame if you couldn't just pick up the Storm Ruler because of some dated game mechanics. Now that would really ruin the mood. Yeah, despite how much praise I've given it, it's not all perfect. Listen, I think this game is great, but it really shows that this was their first time doing this type of thing. The equip burden when wearing stuff makes sense and it's pretty interactive. The item carrying burden makes no sense and it's not interactive. Speaking of unfun bad mechanics, world tendencies suck. Now the idea of the world changing due to your actions is a good one. Maybe just don't tie that to the only action that you sometimes have no control over. You see, when you kill a boss or pop an ephemeral eye, you become human. In this state, you have more health and can do multiplayer shenanigans. Thing is though, if you die in this form, your world tendency becomes darker, meaning the game gets harder. Now from an experience perspective, this is a little interesting, and adds more risk to being human other than just die human, wake up not human. But let's be real here, if you are experienced, you probably aren't going to be needing the health or die that often at all in the first place. Whereas a new player, somebody that would actually be helped greatly by a bonus to their HP, would get severely punished for failing. Especially if they repeatedly die in a human form and have turned their world into a hellscape. The worst part is, the only way to actually fix world tendency besides being in multiplayer is by killing the bosses or fighting a special demon inside of each world. By the way, those demons look like this. Yeah, my bad, that makes 3 times. On the bright side, it is actually pretty hard to die, especially when your man can carry up to about 95 Dark Souls Estus Plus. Though there is one point in time when it is pretty easy to die over and over again. Due to the game being non-linear, you can do any area you want at any time. Because of this, the difficulty curve can get pretty wonky, especially if you decide to tackle areas in one go. So yeah, the game's definitely got that first entry in the series stank, and that was without me even mentioning the gender-specific armor sets. I don't know what a mechanic like that is even doing in a game like this. On the bright side, a lot of that stank did get scrubbed off in the PS5 Remaster, which pretty much only added quality of life changes. Speaking of, the PS5 Remaster of Demon Souls is really good. On raw graphics alone, the difference between the two is about the same you'd see between a PS1 and a PS2 game. The remaster has that this is how you remember it looking type of look, though it's not all straight up improvements. Some enemies in the original have a completely different feel to them. This is most apparent with the Vanguard demon. In the original, he had this strange, almost alien-like look to him, but in the remake, he was replaced with a pretty average looking demon design. A good one, mind you, but not an interesting one. And the same goes for the music, actually. Yes, it is all good, I definitely enjoyed all of it, but the original does have some points where it shines a bit brighter. In the original, the tracks were a lot more minimalistic. Whereas in the remaster, pretty much every track is grandiose now. Now while that does work for something like Storm King and sounds amazing, it does sound strange when the orchestra is going full blast and you're fighting the Turd Titan. All I'm saying is that there's a reason why I only use the originals tracks in this video. Despite the graphics though, I think the biggest actual overall improvement would be how the game feels to play. Which is strange, because when Bluepoint goes to remake a game, they keep almost all the code the exact same, which stays true for this game as well. Turns out animations and sound design matter a lot. They matter so much in fact that they can change the game's feel completely, which is what happened here. And this change is all for the better. The changes definitely felt the most when landing critical blows. There are now different animations for both backstabs and parries for when two-handing and one-handing all weapon types. And each and every single one of these animations are just brutal. Apparently in this world, everyone's bones are extra crispy. The magic in this version also looks extra tasty. It lures me in, I almost don't want to dodge it. Especially the Blue Moon Greatsword. I actually love swinging this thing around so much that when I found out that my first 9-hour playthrough had been corrupted and I had to play the whole thing again, I really didn't mind. The way the magic trails behind the blade as you swing it, the way it constantly glows the best color on the spectrum, and the way it disintegrates anything it touches like Blue Moon butter is just so addicting. I can guarantee you that at least 5 minutes of my playthrough was spent solely swinging this thing at random boxes. It is so satisfying. Another fun thing added in the remaster is the photo mode. Oh my god, it's a pause button. But jokes aside, playing around with these filters is really fun, especially since you can carry them over in game. Classic looks great, Vivid looks amazing until you can't see anything either because it's too dark or too bright, and you can even make your own custom ones by messing around with the sliders. You can seriously deep fry the shit out of this game. There's even Sigma Vision. Oh, yeah, also the character creator is a bit better. And yes, I did decide to date this video by modeling the character after myself. So that just about concludes everything there is to know about Demon's Souls. Through and through, it's a pretty solid game, even without any of the HD Remaster stuff. I think if I'm willing to beat a game 2.5 times in the span of a day, then yeah, odds are it's pretty good. Though, after saying that sentence, I realized I could just be delusional. Which is why I asked other people to try the game and give opinions. When my friend tried it, he said it was really cool. Thing is, he's actually played most of the Dark Souls games, so it's most likely just Stockholm Syndrome. So I decided to ask the guy who's sitting right next to him watching him play what he thought about it. He said, I don't really get it. He's just been walking through a swamp for 7 minutes. Thing is, this guy's never even seen gameplay of Dark Souls, meaning it's a pretty blind opinion. So I then decided to ask the guy who's sitting right next to the guy who's sitting right next to the guy. And he told me, dude got the boss one hit away, then stepped on a magic mine and got shot by 8 missiles. Funniest shit I've ever seen. Thing is, this guy's only played Elden Ring and he's watched gameplay of the other Souls games. Meaning, I think he just likes watching people suffer. So I then decided to force a 5-year-old to play the game instead. You know, I honestly don't know what I was expecting. But damn, he's good. Here's what he had to say. I like the game. Game cool. Then he died and told me this. Oh, Abi, I know like this game bad. Can we play the robot one? So I then decided to watch him play the robot one. Damn. He's good. So through all that research, I can safely say that it didn't matter because my opinion is the only one that matters. And my opinion is that the game is good and well deserving of a playthrough if you like the Souls titles. Now, with my final verdict of the game out of the way, there's only one question left to answer. A question that I couldn't figure out an answer for until the credits had started rolling. This whole time I was wondering why I cared so much about this game despite playing it all those years ago when I wasn't too big on Dark Souls. And now that I've played it again, I think I finally got why that's the case. When this game ends, it kinda hits you hard. Earlier, when I said this was the final boss of the game, that was only partly true. Yes, Alaunt is the final boss, and the False King Alaunt is the final real challenge in the game. But after defeating him, it turns out that the real Alaunt is within the old one. Once you've defeated the False King and you return to the Nexus, your goal is finally completed, meaning it's time to see the old one. This opens a path to the old one, a path the Wax Maiden guides you through. Once at your destination, you are left in this strange, desolate plain with nothing but sandy ruins as far as the eye can see. Then the wax maiden calls the great creature down so you can enter it, upon which Alaunt begins to speak with you again. While cutting through to the Old One's center, Alaunt explains that you have two choices before you. You can either do as the monuments say and put the beast back to rest, or you can take the souls for yourself and become an all-powerful demon. Whichever action you plan on taking, he welcomes you, knowing well that you're most likely the first and last visitor he'll ever see. Upon entering the fog wall, instead of being met by an all-powerful, imposing demon, you're instead met with a writhing mass of flesh, his only attacks being wild, uncontrolled squirming. During the battle, he again begins speaking with you, asking if you've seen all the suffering in the world outside, before explaining why he believes the Old One is actually a mercy by God. As it turns out, this creature was created as a punishment because humans had started using the soul arts with unjust intentions. Be it greed or power, people had begun abusing the soul arts for their own personal gain. Seeing this, God was disgusted since he had given life a soul so it could make its own decisions, hopefully good ones, but after seeing how wrong he was, he decided to create the Old One, and with it, all the demons. The Old One was a weapon meant to end all life and revert it to a colorless fog. It was a poison meant to kill poison. Though this may seem extreme, and that's because it is. In reality, only one group in particular was really at fault for inciting God's wrath, and those were the monumentals themselves. And although they would manage to seal away the monstrosity they created, the damage was already dealt. The world was scarred, and more importantly, nothing had really changed. The world at large was still filled with strife, and the people in power who had been abusing the soul arts didn't change their ways except for the monumentals themselves. If anything, all that banishing the Old One did was cause even more suffering, because now the impoverished people left behind from the war had nowhere to go, and had no soul arts to help themselves recover. The entire game, it feels like everything is either in ruins or beyond saving, as if the very core of this world had become rotten. So when you finally do land the killing blow, and the last words you hear before the game ends are,
"You fool! Don't you understand? No one wishes to go on."
yeah, it makes you question your actions a bit. Especially when, despite the music rising and the narrator explaining that a new hero was now here to maintain the fabric of the world, seemingly nothing changes. As the credits roll, a somber piece of music plays, as you see shots of each areas you have visited. Except this time they're devoid of any demons. In fact, they're devoid of any life at all. After all, there isn't anybody who actually wanted these places to be saved in the first place. The world you've tried so hard to save is a world that nobody wants to be a part of anymore. This, coupled with the fact that after the credits end, instead of getting met with a title screen or some congratulations pop-up, it's just you at the very beginning of the game again, it really makes you feel like the game is indifferent to what you did. Like nothing had changed at all. Except there is one small change, one that isn't even mentioned, though it's standing there right in front of you. It's the real reason these games are so special. Because despite nothing in the game changing or growing, you did. So ends Demon Souls, the spark that ignited the first flame.
But then there was fire. And with fire came disparity. Heat and cold, life and death, and of course, light and dark. And amongst the living are seen carriers of the accursed dark side.